Okay, so now let's go ahead and get started, now that you know who we are. Okay, so here's today's agenda. I hope you guys got that attachment I sent yesterday in one of the 2 emails. But first off, we're going to start with what's new within the admin portal, GIN, and handicapping as a whole. So we're going to go through that. Then we're essentially going to go on a journey. Maddie and I are going to ping pong back and forth today and take you through a journey of getting your handicap index to taking that handicap index and essentially showing you how to use it and what the back end math looks like. Not too mathy, but we'll definitely get a little into the math here today. And then we'll go what to know before a round in terms of your handicap index once you have it. What to do during a round with your handicap index. Looking forward to that segment there. And then finally, after you've played your golf, how to post your scores, what's the maximum score that you can post, hint, hint, net double bogey, and what all safeguards and things do we have in place to kind of help make sure that that handicap index does show your potential as a golfer. Okay, so I'm going to start with what's new. Okay, so some of you on the call maybe who are part of the committees of your club maybe have seen a couple of emails from me about certification, or have asked me a couple questions about handicapping certification, because for those of you who don't know, all clubs in the state of Colorado and Wyoming need to be certified. What does that mean? That means that they need to have passed the WHS exam last year, and they need to have at least 10 active members on their roster. And so as of last year, everybody did take and pass the WHS exam with at least 80%. So that means you do not need to take the test again until the rules of handicapping is updated in 2028. But that being said, you will need to take what is called the USGA assessment. It's just a big word for essentially the USGA will send you an email that looks like this. And it's just going to ask you to click a button and confirm who the contact individual is for the club, whether it's you and or needs to be updated to a new member of the handicap committee who will be taking over those duties. So that link was sent out in February from the USGA directly, and it looks like this. I know some people always ask me, is this email legit? It is legit. It needs to be done in order for your club to remain authorized. And then those of you who have heard me say this a few times now in the past few years, if you are not authorized or do not complete this by the end of June, all of your members in your club will become, their handicap indexes will turn into an NH until this is done. So not by me, the USGA automatically goes in, they keep records of everything just as we do, and we'll do that. So please do that if you haven't done so already. If you don't know the status of this, please let me know, or Maddie and I know, and we'll be more than happy to take a look and make sure you guys are up to date and ready to go for the season. Okay. All right. Additionally, along with that, we try to help with this as much as we can. And we do ask that you also fill out the club information form. What is this form? This form is essentially the same thing, plus adding on who your president is and who the billing contact is for the club, just so we know who to send, all the bills to in case there's been some turnover there, who to send, who to send our monthly newsletters to, and things like that. So where do you find that? If you go to the coloradogolf.org website, click on this nice membership tab here, and then click on the button here under Club Services that reads Club Information Form. Once you do that, once you do that, it'll take you to a form, all virtual. Just type in current chairs of each of the positions there. If you don't have one of the positions, you can leave it blank. But once you type in all that information, just click the complete button and you're good to go. That'll send me, our finance individual, and our marketing individual all emails as to what those new positions are. Okay. All right. those of you new to this position and or if you're on a committee, new to that committee or new to golf, here are the big changes or the principal changes that happened last year in 2024, which was a revision year. The first one was scores used when hole or holes not played. We'll go through that a little bit on a higher level because that was a big change in 2024. The treatment of 9-hole scores, which kind of goes hand in hand with when hole or holes are not played and how those are used. There's a little bit of guidance on handicap allowances.
Great.
So let's see who I'm getting some feedback here. So if you can mute yourself.
I see you're really excited.
Let's see.
Okay.
There we go. Okay. Perfect. All right. And we're not going to touch on that too much. We'll touch a little bit more on that in the committee section, which will happen in about 2 weeks. We'll go over that more in depth. The handicap review reporting tool. So this is now an automatic tool if you are part of the handicap committee and have access to the admin portal. This is a tool that you can use to do all of your review for you. We'll kind of go into that here in a second. And then the new minimum length of a golf course. It used to be that golf courses had to be at least a minimum of 1,500 yards to be rated. Now that minimum has changed and gone all the way down to 750 yards per 9 holes. And so at the end of last year, all but one course in Colorado, one short course in Colorado has been rated, or should I say two? I apologize, two. Has been rated. Yeah, so if you like playing those par 3 courses, please go out and play. I will say if you do play the Kennedy par 3 course, that is one of the courses that has yet to be rated. So if you enjoy that course and want it to be rated and want to be able to push your scores from there, please go talk to the staff and they will definitely help you out on, or hopefully once they hear enough of it, they'll ask us to come out and re-rate the course for score posting purposes. Okay. Now, this handicap review tool that I kind of mentioned here, what is that? So it essentially utilizes both the expected score for a player, as well as different intrinsic player equations that the system has built into it to determine whether or not their handicap index meets their potential as a golfer as defined by the scores that they have been posting, right? So what this tool does is it looks at 365-day period, and it either has or sets a high flag or a low flag score for different scores based on the math, right? So it looks at all the scores posted from 365 days ago and flags them, whether it be a high or a low flag. And depending on how frequent you play, the more flags that will be needed for a modification, right? If you don't play enough, the less flags you need to, for the system to provide a modification recommendation, but the more frequent you play, the more scores showing the same sort of trend that will be needed for the system to recommend handicap modification. Okay. And the analysis is based on the player's handicap index on the day of the handicap review, not yesterday, not tomorrow, but on the day of the review. So again, it's all the system is doing. It's an automatic function, and it's looking for any abnormalities, whether it be up or down based on their current potential as defined by their handicap index on that day. Okay, so if we look here, here's a downward adjustment or a low flag. So a score which is 2 standard deviations. Again, hopefully you guys remember the standard deviation in math class back in the day. 2 standard deviations better than the player's expected score should occur approximately 2.5% of the time. Therefore, the criteria for flagging a score is set to 2 standard deviations from the player expected score. So all it's looking for is that 2% or that 2 standard deviations from what the player's expected score is. And you might have a question of what is exactly an expected score. We will go over that in today's presentation. So hang on to that thought if you do have that question. All right. And so here is a nice little table of what, based on how many flag scores, the number of scores needed, and the number of flags needed to produce a recommendation by the system. So 1 to 14, that you need 2 or more flag scores. And then, the more scores you post, more flags you need. And vice versa. Very, very similar to that, but except for going the other direction. And when you need an upward adjustment here, you need 3 or more flag scores if you have 1 to 14 scores posted for any recommended upward adjustment of a handicap index. Okay, very similar. The math is just a little different. Yeah, so at a high level, that's kind of what it is. Again, we'll go over this a little bit deeper in the committee presentation here in a couple of weeks, but I wanted to keep this real high level for you to not get bogged down with all the details there. Okay, one thing here, one of the kind of the requirements in the rules of handicapping is any adjustment recommended must be at least 1 point, either up or down. So the cool thing about this tool is the system will, when it is run for somebody, it'll keep running until the system shows that a recommendation is no longer needed. So it could be at least 1, but potentially could be 2, 3, 4 points if necessary. So it is a really cool tool to have at the fingertips of a handicap committee, essentially kind of taking any bias out of it and showing any recommendation based off actual data, which is nice. Okay. And then, of course, once that recommendation is given to the individual, whomever runs it, they can take it back to the committee, the club, or whomever they need to. And they don't even need to use it. They just maybe just want to keep an eye on that individual. But the job has been done by the system, and then it's up to the committee to determine whether or not that recommendation should be applied. If there is no recommendation by the system, then that player is playing to their ability as a golfer as determined by their handicap index. Okay, perfect. Now you may ask yourself, where do I find this tool exactly? Well, good question. So if you go into the admin portal, those of you who have access, if you do not, unfortunately, this doesn't apply to you, but can be run for you on the back end. So you would go into an individual's account, in this case, it's me, and we now have a new handy dandy tab here called Handicap Review tab. All you would do from there is click the button and watch the magic work. It takes a couple minutes based upon how many scores are posted. With me, I barely post maybe 10 scores a year. So when I run it, nothing happens for me, although I am gradually seeing my handicap index go up because I only do play 10 times a year, but it's a slow increase versus a drastic increase. So I think Maddie can attest to that slow incline. But anyway, so that is what's new in the handicap system in terms of the handicap review tool, new big time topics from last year, which we'll go over in the presentation, as well as the assessment. Are there any questions based on that information? All right. Silence is golden. Perfect. In that case, I believe, Maddie, I will hand it over to you. Take us through the fundamentals of a handicap index, or the WHS.
Yeah, going through the fundamentals.
Maddie, take it away.
So the purpose of the World Handicap System. So the main purpose that the USGA has given out there is to enable as many golfers as possible to obtain a handicap index, which that new handicap index has been pushed up to 54.0. They're also able to use that handicap index on any golf course around the world and then compete and play recreationally with anyone else on a fair basis. And so here, so we have minimum scores to obtain a handicap index. You either need to play 3 rounds of 18 or 6 rounds of 9. So 54 holes made up of any combination. There is no time limit on completing the submissions of these scores. So if it takes a whole summer, it takes a whole summer, and they're not going to lose that progress throughout the summer. So it won't delete anything or get rid of anything within the system. And it is a strong recommendation to post those scores, excuse me, hole by hole throughout the round, through each round posted. Just to be able to help the system on the back end better assess the potential of a player. With this, we'll get into it more as we get throughout these fundamentals, but being able to post hole by hole just helps the system in a long run with all of the mathematical equations going on the backside that we don't really know about. But yeah, so the maximum handicap index, like I said, is now 54.0 for men and women. So that's pretty exciting to be able to get more players into the game. And so the big thing with this is that it speaks to key principles. One, to be inclusive and accessible as possible, so especially if you have some players who think that they don't necessarily have the ability to have a handicap index. More likely than not, they will be able to fit into that 54.0 handicap max that there is. And then it's also, like I said, easy as possible for golfers to obtain and maintain that handicap index. You're good. So for calculating that handicap index, it takes the lowest 8 scores of the most recent lowest 8 of the most recent 20 score differentials and rounds to the nearest 10th. So what you'll see in the handicaps, or when you're looking in admin portal or on your own page, anywhere you see blue stars on the left-hand side, or correlating the highlighted numbers where the differentials slot is, those are the scores being used for your round or for your handicap index. And so the big thing to notice there, that the more you post, the last scores at the very bottom get kicked off. And then it recalculates your new handicap index based off of the new scores and the new low differentials coming in. So it's ever changing. So for calculating that score differential, this is the main mathematical equation that we use for a lot of people, and so it's 113 divided by the slope rating for that course, and then multiplied by the adjusted gross score minus the course rating minus any PCC adjustments. And this is all done, calculated through the system. So it's not like you need to sit down and calculate out your own score differential every time that you go through this, but you're more than welcome to if you want to really get to know the system. And then just to go through what the score, what all these different things are. So 113 is the average slope rating on a course. And so you take that divided by the slope rating of the tee that you are playing at the course. So each tee has a different course rating and slope attached to it. They're not all the same. So making sure to really remember which one that you are playing. It will adjust what your score differential is on what you put in. And then it takes your adjusted gross score minus the course rating, again, specific to each tee, and then any PCC adjustment. And the PCC adjustment is adjusted automatically through GIN. It's not something that you go in and you're like, oh, the course played easier or harder today, so I'm going to put in this PCC adjustment just for me. The system automatically does it to everyone. So one thing to look at here is just kind of what your score differential is in the scoring record, and then any kind of adjustments that would be used. So like the number of score differentials in scoring records. So if you have 3, and the score differential will be used in calculation of a handicap index, you'd take the lowest one of those 3 scores, and then there would be a -2 adjustment in there, possibly any adjustments in there. And so the more you start to post, obviously the more you go, 15 to 16, the average of the lowest 5, there's not really going to be any adjustment on there because it's getting pretty close to that 20. And then obviously when you get to 20 scores posted, it's going to take the average of the lowest 8.
Yep. And the reason for that minus adjustment here on that initial, when you're first starting out here, is because 3 scores or 54 holes of golf doesn't really show a full picture of the potential of the golfer. It may not even show what the true ability of that golfer is. So if this golfer who just got a handicap index were to enter a tournament, the system automatically adjusts it down by 2, the lowest one differential, adjusts it down by 2 in order to protect the field in case they decide to play the way that they will be playing moving forward during that event.
Perfect. So here we have a handicap index example. So with only 4 scores posted, use the lowest differential to calculate his initial index, which is at 5.5 at City Park Golf Course. So you take that 5.5 and then you minus that 1 because we only had 4 scores posted in there. Gives you a handicap index of 4.5.
Perfect. Any questions on that? All right. Perfect. Okay. Moving forward, I will take it from here. So before round, so what do we have so far? So we know kind of what the WHS is, or the World Handicap System is. It's this all-inclusive system that now kind of reacts differently based on the golfer's potential, right? So now what we do is we take our handicap index and now we figure out some things, right? So before a round, based on the tee that you play, the system will actually determine what your course handicap is. And why is this necessary? Well, it's necessary for a couple of things. If you have a stroke on that hole and you're playing your friend, it's always good to know where you get those strokes. So you're like, oh, actually I had a 4 but net 3, which means I beat you. Now you owe me money. That's one reason. But it also shows where you could potentially have a bad hole. So based upon where you do get those strokes, it actually adds to the maximum score that you can have on that hole. The more pops, the higher the score can be. The less pops or no pops, double bogey is kind of your max. We'll go over that here later on in the presentation. But anyway, so if you're wondering what a course handicap is, it's the score that you need to play to par from those set of tees. Okay, and all it is your handicap index multiplied by the slope of the tees that you play, divided by 113, which we know as standard slope. And then you take that sum and you add it to course rating minus par. So I know this is an older slide, but I like this slide a lot, or these next 2 slides a lot, because it shows you the comparison of what we used to have versus what we have now. So here's the first one. This is a scratch golfer and a 15.0 index golfer. This is not the current system. This is the old system. So if you take a look, if you were a scratch golfer, anything multiplied by 0 is 0, right? So they were a 0 regardless of the length of tees. 6,000 to 7,000, still a 0. Okay, if you had a 15.0 handicap index golfer, they were actually the same. They had the same amount of strokes needed to play to par from 3 different tees. And these tees just happen to be 4,000 yards apart and 2,000 from this one. So a 6,000 yard spread before they needed an additional point to 7,000. So kind of, it never made sense to me. Like, why would somebody need the same amount of strokes from 3 different tee sets? Because in theory, the further back you go, the harder the tee is, right? Mentally, but numerically, you can see that based on the rating. So now if we compare each of these golfers to what we have today, all right? So today, here's our scratch golfer example. We take a look on the right side here and look at what happens today with that addition of course rating minus par. They actually, the further back they go, the more strokes they need to play to par. And the further up they go, which meaning the less difficult those tees are, the less strokes that they need to play to par, right? So the only place where they are actually truly a 0 is on the white tees, where before they were a 0 on all tees. I always like that representation there. Now, if we move to our good friend, the 15.0 handicap golfer here, again, just to remind you, on the left side was what we used to have. And on the right side is where they are today. Again, showing the same trend. The further back you go, the more difficult the tees are, the more strokes that you need to play to par or to play to your handicap index, right? So the only true place where this golfer is indeed a 15, which matches their handicap index, would be the 6,000 yard tee at, or the silver tees here in this example. All right. Okay, now, I challenge everybody this summer to play or to try to set your target score and to try to hit it. Because if you do hit your target score, what does that mean? It means that you actually play to your handicap. And based on the math, I don't know if you've ever joined me on one of these before, but the math says that we play, or a golfer on average plays to their handicap index 20% of the time, or 1 every 5 times. Okay, so but the cool thing about this example is it shows the same trend. The further back you go, the higher the scores will be, right? So increasing ratings, increasing slopes, also shows increase of course handicaps, but it also shows increased scores, right? So if you were to shoot the same score on the least difficult and the most difficult tee, you will have a lower differential from this tee than you would on this tee, right? A good score from a hard set of tees gives you a lower differential than a good score from an easier set of tees. So let's take a look at an example here. So my handicap index is a 4.5. Today we're going to be playing the green tees with a rating of 71.0, slope of 125, and par of 72. So if we take a look at the course handicap example, or the math again, it should look something like this. 4.5, which is my handicap, multiplied by slope of the tees played. You take the sum of that and you divide that by 113, which is also known as standard slope. If there's one thing you learned today, hopefully it's 113 is standard slope. And then you take the sum of that and you add that to course rating minus par, 71 minus 72, which looks something like this, 4.978 plus a negative 1.0. And the reason why I didn't round this is very important, and I'll tell you here in a little bit why. But my handicap, or my course handicap, would be 3.978 unrounded. But if I were to not be doing anything else with that, then the system would round that to 4. Right? So my course handicap would be a 4, and all you need to do in order to get your target score is add 4 to par. So par of my tees is 72, which means the target score for the day for me in order to shoot to my handicap would be a 76. Okay? Perfect. Now, as we all know, those of us that play in events or things like that, we don't always get to use 100% of our course handicap. So sometimes our handicap is percentage down, and we play with a percentage of our total handicap, right? So whenever that happens, that is known as a playing handicap. So all a playing handicap is taking that full unrounded course handicap and multiplying it by a handicap allowance based on the format of play that we're playing that day. Okay. And it's not really applicable in our state anymore, but if there are different tees being used in an event and players are playing against one another where the pars are different, there's an additional adjustment. But like I said, there really isn't that case anymore. Most of the tees are very consistent with par being the same. Okay, so let's take a look. So one of the big changes that people kind of overread and kind of threw under the rug in 2020 was the playing handicap calculation. Before, what used to happen was you would calculate your course handicap and you would round it to a whole number. And then you would multiply it by a percentage and then round that to a whole number. So essentially you're rounding twice, which isn't really accurate based on the decimals. So in 2020, there's actually a big change saying that instead of rounding twice, you're only going to round once at the very end. So that's why we always use our unrounded course handicap number, which was, if you remember a few slides ago, 3.978, and you multiply that by the percentage instead of the 4 that this rounds to, okay? And in this case, the math actually works out where both would equate to the same number, but I have seen cases, and believe me, I got phone calls every time this was incorrect about when if you rounded early or if you rounded twice versus rounding once, the numbers actually came out different, which means there was 1 stroke difference in the numbers. And any of you who are familiar with perhaps throwing down a little bit of money knows exactly how important that 1 stroke can be sometimes. Okay, so in this case, remember my course handicap was a 4, but if I'm playing to 85% of that, we would use my unrounded number there, 3.978. And so my playing handicap in this case, or 85% of my full unrounded course handicap, would give me a playing handicap of 3, right? Okay, so we have our handicap index. We have determined what tees we are going to play with the rating slope and things like that. So now we have determined not only our course handicap, but our playing handicap. Now we need to know where we get those strokes, right? So if we take a look at a scorecard here, everybody should know, or everybody should have seen, there's always a couple of different lines. Of course, there's always the blank lines that we write our names in, but there's always the tee that we're playing, the yardages. There's a par of each of those tees or each of those holes. And there's also what we call the stroke index line. And what this stroke index line essentially tells us is what the hardest holes are and what the easiest holes are. 1 would be the hardest hole, and 18 would be the easiest hole, right? So if we take a look here, if you remember, I have my 3, but in this case, 4. That means I would get a pop on the 4 hardest holes as defined by the stroke index line. So whatever your course handicap is, you can start going down from 1 all the way to 18. So if you had an 18, you would get a 1 pop on every hole. But if you had a 4 like I do, you would find the 4 hardest holes on the course as defined by the stroke index line, and essentially put a little dot here in the right corner telling you, hey, you get a pop on this hole, right? And so you'll see that Kate Mate, who is another person that works in our office, she's the head of our tournament department. She also is a 4, although I think she should get 0, but that's just me. And then, of course, we have Simone Biles here as well, who is working on our golf game, but is still pretty good, and who is a 10. But yeah, so it's always important to not only calculate that course handicap, but to also know where you get those strokes. With that, are there any questions? So again, where are we right now? We have our handicap index. We have turned that handicap index into a course handicap, and we have turned that course handicap into a playing handicap. And now based on our stroke index allocation, we know where we get our pops. So that's where we are so far. Okay, I don't see anything coming in now. All right. Perfect. All right, Maddie, I'll pass it off to you to take our popped scorecard and turn it into something cool when we play.
Yes. So during our round, a few things we're going to go through here. So first thing is going to be the maximum hole score for handicap purposes. And so the big thing to see here is that obviously you will have 2 different scores for tournament purposes or for score posting purposes. And so for players submitting their first scores to obtain an initial handicap index, the maximum score for each hole played is limited to par plus 5 strokes. And so as you keep going through and through, that will slowly get moved down to not being plus 5 strokes for someone who has 20 plus scores entered in. But if you're taking a look at the scorecard that we have posted here, looking down the line, hole 6 for par five, for a person that does not have an established handicap. They had a kind of a rough round or a rough hole, didn't do great, so they got a 12 on the hole. And so then looking at the plus 5 strokes for a not established handicap, the maximum score they can get is a 10. So par 5 plus 5 strokes is a 10. So for score posting purposes, the score entered will be a 10, but if you're playing in a tournament or something of that nature, like a 9-hole tournament, that 12 would still be used. So you have the gross score there, which is a 63, which would be their tournament score. And then they'd have a 61, which is their adjusted gross score for handicap purposes. And so now, if you are on a hole and you do not complete it, so when a hole started but not completed, the score recorded for handicap purposes is their most likely score. So we have a few slides going through what how to determine what the most likely score would be, just so you're not out there thinking, oh yeah, I'd definitely make this chip and have it be a 1 and move on, because that is not the most likely thing to happen. So various circumstances that might result in a player starting a hole but not holing out. Main examples being when the result of a hole has been decided. So like if you're in match play and you're on 17 or 18 and you have lost that round, you can use most likely score to finish out hole 17, so on and so forth. If a hole has been conceded in match play, do that as well, especially like in team events. You're able to use that most likely score, and then a player's partner has already posted a better score. So again, team circumstance where taking the best score, someone posts a 4 and you're still probably 20 yards out from the green, you can then go ahead and say, oh, it'd probably take me 2 or 3 strokes to get in, so that'd be a 6 or a 7 for me, and then move on. So here are some guidelines to try and help your players better understand what to do for most likely score. So if a ball lies on a putting green no more than 5 feet from the hole, it's only 1 additional stroke. And then if your ball lies between 5 feet and 20 yards from the hole, you will add anywhere from 2 to 3 additional strokes, depending on the difficulty of the green and the ability of the player. So you won't have the same most likely score at this point for someone who's a 0 handicap versus a 20 handicap. You might add the 2 for the 0 and then the 3 for the 20. But that's kind of up to the player's discretion and what their ability is. And then the last one here, if you lie more than 20 yards from the hole, 3 or 4 additional strokes, depending on the position of the ball, difficulty of the green, and the player ability of the player. So when a hole is not played, which is a change from last year that we saw, a score from an incomplete round or when 1 or more holes have not been played may only be used for handicap purposes, if among other things. So the round has been played over at least the minimum number of holes required for either a 9-hole or so 9 holes required, or an 18-hole score, 10 to 17 holes. So on that, you have to play, so you can't play 2 to 10 or like 3 to 11. It has to be on a rated 9-hole course. So for example, you have to play 1 through 9, or if you happen to play the back 9, 10 through 18. But you're not able to, like, for example, I think we got this question a decent amount last year with like shotgun starts, and you're out there and you are on 4B and you only make it to 12A or to 12. Unfortunately, that score is not postable because you did not play 9 holes on a rated 9. So that is something that you need to keep in mind, especially if you happen to do anything shotgun starts with your leads. That if there is inclement weather or anything coming in that might end things, just to keep that in mind. And then yes, for the 18-hole score, 10 through 17 holes has to be completed. Same thing with that as well. You want it to be 1 through 10, or if you're starting on the back 9, 10 through 1 completed for that 18-hole score to be posted. And then it also has to be a reason, the reason for not completing the round has to be a valid reason. So a few of those valid reasons for not playing a hole or finishing a round: darkness or bad weather, injury or illness, a hole has been declared out of play by the committee for maintenance purposes, or a match finishing before the final hole on a course. Big thing with this is that every decision that is made for a hole not being played or something of that nature is up to the committee. You guys have the final decision on what is deemed a hole that they can pass, so on and so forth. Here are some not so valid reasons to not be able to post your score. So whether that does not prevent the continuation of play, not playing a particular hole to avoid a high score, not playing the final holes on a golf course in order to avoid submitting a high score if playing badly, or a low score if playing well, and then any other situations considered unreasonable by the committee.
Good morning. Hello, sir.
Okay. Any questions about during a round calculations? So again, that's when a hole is started but not completed, when a hole is not played. So if you're not worried about any of those things, remember the goal is to just have fun, get that little white ball into the hole, hopefully in the least amount of shots as possible. But when that doesn't happen, there are things that we just described that will help. Any questions there?
Beth entered in the chat that
Yep.
for 9 holes, it can be posted with 7 holes completed. And I believe that was the
Correct.
or change, that it has to be 9 holes. Now you can no longer do 7.
Correct. That was 2020, but as of 2024,
2020.
and the way that was the way, as of 2024, you at least have to play 9 holes. Actually, there in the committee guide, I believe there is a little snippet that if 8 holes was played and there's a valid reason for not playing the 9th, the committee has the discretion to use net par for that 9th hole to complete the 9-hole round. So, yeah, but it at least has to be 9 unless there's a super valid reason for only being able to finish 8. Good question, though, Beth. Good question. Anything else on that front there? Oh, all right. Do we have a question? No question. Just a little bit of background feedback, I think. Okay, perfect. So before we go on to the after the round where all the magic happens, as I like to say, let's do a recap. What do we have so far? Okay, so we have our handicap. We have taken that handicap, converted it to our course handicap. We have found out where we get those pops. And now we have just played a course, and now we know what happens if we start a hole but don't finish it. And we also know what happens, we've been teased at what happens if we don't complete or we don't start a hole at all. We at least know we have to finish at least 9 holes for a 9-hole round, or 10 holes to post an 18-hole score. Okay, so that's kind of where we are. All right. So let's see what kind of magic happens, huh? So in order to post a score, right, that score has to be acceptable, right? And it has to be one of the 5. It has to be played in an authorized format of play. It has to be in a company of at least one other person, even though this can be debated all day long. But according to the rules of handicapping, in writing, you will see verbatim, it says, in order for the score to be posted, the player needs to be in company of at least one additional person. Fun fact, that person does not need to be playing. It just needs to be somebody who can attest to the fact that you shot what you shot. Okay, the score played must be played by the rules of golf. We have plenty of rule seminars if you want to attend one of those. I try to keep to the basics and not try to get into the weeds, things like that personally. But if you do want to get into the weeds of all the rules and things like that, we do have some rule seminars coming up. Shameless plug there. And then on a golf course with current ratings and slopes, just so you are aware and informed, course ratings are actually good for 10 years. but every course here in the state of Colorado is on an 8-year cycle, giving us room to, for COVID, or in case somebody or a course decides to do a multi-million-dollar renovation and close the course for a year, things like that. It gives us some wiggle room, but course ratings are good for 10 years, even though we re-rate them here in Colorado every 8, and then Wyoming, we potentially are going to be on a 7-ish year schedule. We'll see. We're still making that up, but yeah. And then finally, during an active season. So if you're not familiar, the active season here in Colorado is March 15th through November 15th, and the active season in Wyoming is April 1st through October 1st, I believe. Yeah, so whenever we have a beautiful day, say for instance last weekend, and you say, how come I can't post a score to Jen for score posting purposes? Please look down at the grass and tell me what color it is. If it is yellow, that should tell you everything we need to know, because those ratings were produced during the time when the course was at its best or close to its best. When the course was green, the greens were running fast. During the shoulder seasons, courses tend to be a lot harder. Yes, you do get a little bit more roll off the tee. Yes, the greens aren't rolling as quickly. But according to the USGA, when courses are rated, they need to be as close to mid-season conditions as possible. Therefore, during those shoulder seasons, particularly here in Colorado, that is not the case. That is why you cannot post a score, even though we might have a nice day. It's always good to shake out those cobwebs anyway. And usually, scores posted are always better. So a lot of people are like, let me post that score. And then unfortunately, if that score would be posted, it might drop their handicap index down a little bit, which may or may not be the direction they wanted to go. So food for thought moving forward. But we do get that question a lot here, especially around warm days in the early March. Okay, what are some unacceptable scores for score posting? Well, while being coached on the course, right? When using non-conforming equipment, somebody always asked about the chipper. I do believe a chipper is a conforming club now. You might need to take a look at the equipment rules on that, but I do believe that the chipper is good. And then when the number or type of clubs is restricted due to the format of play. So if you play a round, that is 4 clubs, that you can only use 4 clubs, you might play better, but unfortunately that round is not postable for score posting purposes due to the fact that it does limit you access to the remainder of your clubs. All right, when a score cannot be verified by another person, again, that person does not need to be playing to be able to verify a score. So as long as you're playing and accompanied by one person who can verify, that score is postable. And then not playing the required number of holes. Again, you need to at least meet that minimum 9 holes and or 10, 9 or 10. And finally, when a player does not play their own ball, scrambles, alternate shots, things like that, that is not a postable round. It is funny, though, to see when scramble scores are posted, because you can usually identify it really quickly, because it'll be like 88, 92, 54, and you're like, I wonder which one is out of place there. So that's always fun. Okay, now that we know that our score is acceptable, what is the maximum score that we can post for score posting purposes on any one hole? Well, that is known as net double bogey, right? So net double bogey is the score that we can post. That is the maximum score that we can post on any one hole, which is why the system would like you to post hole by hole, and we would like you to post hole by hole, because the system would then do all the math for you. If you don't post hole by hole and you post total score, you would need to do that math beforehand to determine if any scores need adjusting. Okay? But what exactly is net double bogey? Like it's kind of weird to say, like net double bogey. What does that mean? I get, a pop on double bogey. Like what exactly does that mean? So I don't like to call it net double bogey. I always like to call it double bogey plus. So the maximum score in any one hole would be double bogey plus the amount of pops that you would get based on your course handicap calculation that we did up front. Okay. All right. And again, just kind of reiterating the fact that if you post hole by hole, the system will do all of the math for you and you will not need to adjust your score. All right. So let's take a look at a couple of examples here on what net double bogey is. So today is our 2025 WHS Invitational. We are playing Virtual Country Club. Quite nice today, I must say. And we're going to use Cape Mate as an example. Remember, since she was a 4, she got 2 strokes on the front, 2 strokes on the back. We're only going to use the front 9 portion, which means that she would get 1 pop on the 2 hardest holes on the front, as defined by the stroke index line here. So that would mean stroke index hole that has a 1 and a stroke index hole that has a 3 associated to it. So holes 3 and 7 are both par 5s, and Kate just struggles with the par 5s in general anyway. So she ends up shooting a 9 on both of them, right? Oh my goodness, what is going on now? All right, so she's a pretty consistent golfer until she gets to those par 5s, and when she gets there, she just has problems off the tee, shoots 9s on both, right? So if we do the math here just based on this, you would have a score for tournament purposes of a 46. But again, the adjusted gross score for net double bogey is what is posted to GIN. So let's see if we need to adjust any of these scores down. Okay. So let's see, par on the first hole is a 4, and she got a 4. No need to adjust that score. Par on the second hole is a 3, and she bogeyed it. So there's no need to adjust that score either, because again, we're kind of looking for anything that is double bogey or higher. So here on this par 5, he gets a 9. I think that we have a winner here. We need a score that needs to be, or we have a score that needs to be adjusted. So in order to do this, remember double bogey plus pops, we get 1 pop. So double bogey on a par 5 would be a 7, plus our pop be an 8. So the maximum score on this hole for score posting purposes would not be a 9, it would actually be an 8. Okay, we do the same exercise on holes 4, 5, and 6. She parred, and then on a par 3, she bogeyed this one as well. But then we have the same situation. We have a par 5 with 1 pop. Double bogey plus on this hole. The maximum would also be an 8 here. Okay, and then she pars out. So, yes, the score used for the tournament purpose, or for the event purpose, would be 46. But then the score used for score posting purposes would actually be 44. And you see how there could potentially be 2 different numbers there. And if you don't do this, most of the time you'll just not adjust those 2 9s and actually post an incorrect, unadjusted score to GIN, which can then inflate your handicap index. Okay, now if we look at a more difficult example here. So we have a person player A, who has a bunch of pops, right? This person's handicap, or course handicap, equated to between 19 and 36. So you'll see where the pops lie. So let's take a look. So for hole 1, oops, I gave you the answer for that. We have par 4, but then player A shoots an 8. Do we need to adjust that score? Well, let's see, double bogey plus. Double bogey on a par 4 is a 6, plus our 1 pop would be a 7, so yes. So the score for hole 1 instead of an 8 would be a 7. Let's see, for hole 2, player A shot a 4, par is 3. Is there any need for adjustment there? Nope. No need for adjustment on that one. Oh, let's take a look here, a 10. But this golfer gets 2 pops on the par 5s. So double bogey plus 2. So double bogey on a par 5, 7, plus 2. The max on this score would be, or on this hole, would be a 9. Okay, and then 4, 4, and 3, holes 4 and 5 would be similar to hole 1, 7 and 7, and then player A actually parred hole 6, so we don't even need to look at adjusting that score at all. And again, the par 5s, same situation here. The net double bogey score would be a 9. Hole 8 would be similar to holes 1 and 4 and 5. max would be a 7. But then we look at hole 9 here. The hole 9, yes, it is a par 4, but this golfer actually gets 2 pops on this hole. So double bogey plus. So it'd be 6 plus 2. So the maximum score on this par 4 only would be 4 plus 2 plus 2, or an 8. So this would be the only par 4 where the maximum score would be an 8. All of the other par 4s, because there's only 1 pop associated to it, the maximum score would be a 7. So the score used for the event would be a 68, and the score used for handicap purposes would be all the way down to a 61, which would be a 7-stroke difference. Okay, which 7 strokes can indeed affect your handicap index. Okay, now we alluded to this a little bit when Maddie was talking about when holes weren't played, so I'm going to go into depth into that now. Okay, so again, if a committee determines that it is okay that an 18-hole score, or that a score even when holes aren't played, permitted, we will now use what is called the expected score, right? So the expected score is used for any hole or holes not played. Okay, and so the expected score produces what we call an expected score differential. Just like a score produces a score differential, an expected score produces an expected score differential. So when holes 10 through 17 have been played, a value can still be used for the hole not played using the expected score, right? But when you don't finish a round, or you play maybe 14, 15 holes, the player will actually be required to post the score hole by hole in order for this to work, right? Okay. And the one note here I want to mention is, I haven't mentioned it at all, really, is net par. Net par still exists, but it is only to be used sparingly, and all net par is par plus pops. And so you can kind of see it's highlighted here in the second bullet, in limited circumstances now versus using this a lot. So what exactly is the expected score when I say that? Well, the expected score, the definition is right here. The score a player is expected to achieve over a specified number of holes on a course of standard difficulty. So remember how we had standard slope? We also have a course of standard difficulty. A course of standard difficulty gives us a slope of 113, okay? And the expected score is calculated using the player's handicap index and the numerical value against any hole or holes not played during the round, right? So the expected score is actually not based on the one player. It is actually based on the average of players with the same handicap index. So the expected score is not specific to any player, okay? So any golfer with a 10 with a 10 handicap who didn't play the last 2 holes would get the same score for those last 2 holes. Okay, this was a big, big change, and this was questioned a lot, but apparently this was kind of combined with what some of the other countries were doing to kind of bring everybody together in terms of how 9-hole scores are being computed or whenever holes are not being played. Okay, so let's take a look at an example here. I don't know about you, but for me, I always need to see things in front of me versus people telling me how it works. So if we take a look here, we have Jane Smith. She's a 16.0. Her course handicap is an 18. And today's course that she's playing, Sunnyside, here are the ratings and slopes. And she plays the full 9, means she now has an acceptable score. But then it looks like she plays an additional 6 holes, but fails to complete final 2 holes. All right, so an 18-hole score differential will be computed. Right, so now what we can do is essentially split this scorecard into 2 different equations, right? We're going to essentially compute the score differential for the holes played, and we are going to now compute the expected score differential for holes not played. All right, so in order to calculate the score differential for the holes played, we use that equation that we saw very early in the presentation. So we take our rating, we take the rating value for the holes played, we get a 16-hole course rating. This is kind of back-end math, but this is what the system does. It takes into account the 7 holes on the back nine that were played and gets a rating for that, and combines the two together to give you a 16-hole course rating of 63.9. Okay, and it also determines the slope using essentially an average of the slopes. If we take a look here, slope on the front nine was 125, slope on the back was 126. The computer does kind of the back end math and rounds to a whole number to give us a slope of 125 for the 16 holes played. So now we have a 16-hole rating of 63.9 and 125. So now we have information that we can use to compute that score differential, right? We put it into our handy dandy equation that we saw without the PCC this time, and we get our 16-hole differential of 12.7. Everybody with me so far? Again, this is the differential for only the 16 holes played. Now what do we do with the two remaining holes? Well, good question. So what we do is the computer, again, creates an expected score differential based on an average of individuals with a 16.0 handicap index, and determines that the expected score differential for the 2 holes not played is a 2.12. So that is then added to what was calculated earlier, the 12.7, and an 18-hole differential of a 14.8 would be created and posted for score posting purposes. Again, the big thing to remember here is the expected score is based on an average score differential of a player with a given handicap index and is not specific to one golfer or one golf course, because the expected score is based off of a standard course of standard difficulty, not the golf course being played. All right. And this is basically a high-level view of how this is calculated, but essentially it comes down to the number of holes played, the length of the holes played, the course rating information, and par are all used to compute the rating and the slope of the holes played, whether it be 16 in Jane's example, 12, 13, 14, anything that we may use. Okay. And in the scoring record, if a golfer doesn't play the full 18 holes, if this happened to you, then this would be kind of review for you. But what you will see is you will see the score up until you had to stop playing the round. So in this case, if you look here, Jane was at 78 strokes once she finished hole 16. All right, but you will still see that 18-hole score differential computed using that expected score, right? So just if you haven't seen that yet, and you just so happen to not finish a round this year, keep an eye out for that once you look in your GIN account, okay? All right. What are the benefits of this? It's consistent. Players will see more consistency if they were to apply net par, because all net par is par plus pops. As we all know, we could either have a blow-up hole or a really good hole. This expected score kind of takes all of that out and uses actual data from score posting history that the USGA has collected over the years, with the millions of scores posted, to kind of fill in that blank instead of using net par. It is flexible. So for the first time ever, if between 10 to 13 holes are played, the score will still be able to post an 18-hole score differential. And it's modern. The one thing about golf is that it tends to be a little behind the times, if you will, in terms of technology. So what this is trying to do is help leverage technology and the ability of, to manage data and use data in a way to help, in situations like this, whenever players do not finish a couple holes or an entire 9 holes. Okay. Trying to modernize technology and the golf system as a whole, and the experience as well. Okay. Okay, sorry. This was kind of the big ticket item here. But for those of you that are in 9-hole clubs, right, the expected score is what takes place for that second 9 that you don't play. So what you will begin to start seeing, though, is when we rate a golf course, Maddie and I go out rate, even though the course is only 9 holes, you will see the same rating on the front 9 and the back 9 in case you decide to play 18 holes and do a continuous loop. Because if we don't do that, instead of posting one 18-hole score differential, just playing the same 9 twice, what you will see is two 18-hole score differentials because there's only one 9-hole rating. Or even though you played one round continuously, even though it was the same 9, you could potentially post two 9-hole scores if that is not set up the way that we are going to. So moving forward, even though it is a 9-hole course, you will see a front 9 rating and the back 9 rating that match. So just kind of a heads up for you there, just to kind of help out. Okay. And again, I won't go over this again with you, but the expected score is what is used to fill the gap on the back 9. So let's take a look at what this looks like. Okay, and this time instead of Jane, we have John Smith. Okay, his handicap index is a 10, and he's playing from the bronze tees, only the front 9, where it has a rating of 36.0, 125. So again, 2-part process. First part is to calculate the score differential for the holes played. All right, so here we go. Here's the equation, here's filling in those numbers in the equation, and here's the score differential for the holes played, right? Before last year, what used to happen is you would have to wait for another 9 holes to be posted. Those would be combined together, and that'll give you your 18-hole score differential. But now, with the addition of expected score, this 5.42, with a little bit of magic on the back end, can now be posted as an 18-hole score differential. So let's take a look how. So again, the expected hole score differential, using the average of score differentials from players with a 10 handicap, because why? John Smith was a 10, so you only look at individuals with 10.0s. The system determines this for you. I wish you can back end engineer the system to figure out what the exact equation is, but it essentially comes down to the system configures that of an average of all the 10.0 handicaps, based on a course of standard difficulty, the expected score for the 9 holes not played would be 6.38. So now we have our 2 numbers that we need. That expected score differential would be added to the score differential to give you your 18-hole score differential equivalent, which can then be used for score posting purposes, right? So what this does is it takes out, or unfortunately what this does is it takes out, the probability of playing an exceptional round and or a very bad round on the back 9. That's the one caveat to this, is if you're playing really well that day and you don't play the back 9, you don't get to see exactly what would happen. Or if you're playing really badly that day and you don't play the back 9, potentially you could have a higher differential, but you don't get to see really. This is an average of all of those situations. Okay, so again, I like examples. So here is one example. So if player A, who has a handicap index of 4, player B has a handicap index of 10, player C has a handicap index of 16, they all have a 9-hole adjusted gross score of 42. All right, and it all produces the same value, 5.42, right? So because they all have different handicap indexes, that means their expected score differential will be different for each player. And, the higher the handicap index, the higher the expected score differential. So if we look here, the lowest player with a 4 gets a total 18-hole score differential of 8.7. We go to the 10 handicap player, they get a score differential of 11.8. And player C has a 16, they get an expected score, or the 18-hole score differential, 14.9. So if their 9-hole score differential is the exact same, what does that mean? That means that back end math, or that expected score differential, increases and is higher because their handicap index is slowly increased. Okay, let's look at it a different way, shall we? So we have the blue tees, 35, 1, 118. All players shoot the same exact score except for player C down here. Player C shoots a 49. All right. What does that mean? Both A and B have the same score differential on the first 9, but but player C here shoots 2 shots higher, which means their differential will be a little different. So in this case, 13.3. So that's why you have 11.4, 11.4, 13.3. So in this example, all golfers have the same handicap index. So as you would expect, since the first or the differentials are the exact same on the front 9, because the golfers had the same handicap index, that means that 18-hole score differentials would be the same, right? But now player C, yes, the expected score differentials would be the same because this player has the same handicap as these two, but what is different? The front 9 score differential. So that is why this golfer here has an 18-hole score differential of 23.4 instead of a 21.5. Okay, if this golfer would have shot the same and got the same score differential, their 18-hole postable differentials would all be the exact same. I know it's super confusing, but I hope that makes sense. So here's kind of what it looks like when you post a 9-hole score nowadays. If you haven't done so yet, you'll see the N, which stands for 9, or a score type of 9-hole scores. You'll see exactly what that 9-hole score is, the rating and slope of that 9-hole score, and you'll also see an 18-hole score differential. That's the big change. Okay. An expected score can only be used when a handicap index has been established. If somebody who is just starting out doesn't have an established handicap index, the expected score will not be used until that 54 hole or that 54th hole is posted, which is a question that we get. Okay, any questions? I know that was a lot there, and it is very confusing, but the one highlight I want you to take away from all of that, unless you like the math there, is that all of this is done on the back end. So you don't need to worry about computing this yourself. You don't need to worry about computing this for your members. This is all done by Jin based on millions of pieces of data that have been collected with the new system and with the new hole by hole score posting system. Any questions on 9 holes whenever a hole isn't played, things like that?
Barb had a question in the chat. It says, we are a 9-hole league with a home course that is 18 holes. We almost always play the front 9 2 times a week. Does that impact the handicap index over time since we never record 18 holes?
No, it shouldn't, because the 2 9s have 2 different ratings. So playing the front 9 multiple times, once a week, playing the front 9 once a week won't really impact the handicaps at all. It shouldn't anyway. Now, if you play the front 9 continuously twice a week, then that might do something because, although in theory it shouldn't, but it shouldn't impact the handicaps at all. It might do it a little bit initially, but not long term. Good question. Anything else? That's probably the most confusing part of what was recently instituted in 2024. So if you feel confused, I apologize, but I did at first as well. So the more you kind of play around with 9-hole scores and post 9 holes, the more it'll start to make sense. Okay. All right. Let's see. All right, Maddie. That is enough for me talking for now. Your turn.
Perfect. So, for posting your score, second half of the after the round, under the rules of handicapping, a handicap index will update the day after a score is posted. So, for us, every day at midnight, or around midnight, the GIN system automatically does an update to pull in any scores posted and update your handicap index if there are any changes. Players should submit their score as soon as possible after the round is completed and before midnight. And the main reason for this is the PCC calculations. They are added the day of, and so if you're adding in scores late, it's sometimes, not sometimes, where am I going with this? Just being able to post your score day of is better than waiting like a week or two and then posting the score, so that the correct PCC calculation is taken into consideration, rather than it not being adjusted correctly.
Conditions
and-
calculations.
And so for the calculations, when adverse weather conditions or abnormal course setup causes scores to be unusually high or low on a given day, a playing conditions calculations will adjust score differentials to better reflect the player's actual performance. So the PCC, that's what they call it, will be simple and conservative in nature, and it can be anywhere from a -1 adjustment to a +3 adjustment. So obviously, if everyone's playing a little bit better than normal, it might go to a plus condition, or if conditions were a little bit harder than normal, it might go down, just so you kind of see those adjustments. So it's only performed once a day, and then it takes in consideration acceptable scores submitted on a golf course, including all rated tees for both genders. So this requires at least 8 acceptable scores submitted by players with a handicap index of 36 or below to be submitted. And so this is where I was trying to get to in the last slide of needing to post your score immediately rather than waiting, is because your score is most likely taken into consideration for that playing conditions calculation. It is applied in the calculation of score differentials for all players, and then all 9 and 18 hole scores are considered acceptable. So if you see here, looking through, try to find, oh, perfect. So you'll see, so the PCC adjustment is right next to the differential adjustment. And you can see on 630, he had a +1 adjustment, and then 610, he had a -1 adjustment. So you can see that it just automatically makes an adjustment for you. It won't show like the previous score differential and the adjustment and then what the existing score differential is. It's just going to show you what the final number is, just so you're aware. So it's not going to show you what it would have been. I mean, simple math, we should be able to figure out what our original score differential would have been. So if your score differential is 7 strokes or better than your handicap index was from the round that was played, the score is subjected to an exceptional score reduction. So if you're 7.0 to 9.9, excuse me, you could have an ESR adjustment of -1, or there is a, if you're 10 plus strokes lower, it could be an ESR adjustment of -2. And correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron, isn't this an automatic adjustment that made? And it can also be an adjustment made by the handicap committee, so it's a twofer kind of deal.
Well, ESR is automatic. Any additional
It is,
would be a
okay.
modification by the committee. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So the player posted an exceptional score, where you can see here he posted a 4.1 on 522, where all of his other scores were mostly in those low teens. So that resulted in him getting a -1 adjustment to the previous 20 differentials that are being calculated towards his handicap index, because it's showing that he has the playing potential to shoot lower than what his current handicap index is. So it's just adjusting to make it a little bit better. And then again, you can see on 9.5, he also showed a 4.1 score differential. which also assisted in all of those getting a -1 adjustment to the previous 20 differentials. And then as you can see, back at that original 4.1 that was posted on 5/22, it drops it down to a -2 adjustment total. So -1 and then another a -1 ESR adjustment. So he's down to a -2 adjustment on the remaining of those 20 differentials, if that makes sense. And then any scores posted after that ESR adjustment score differential, they do not get affected with that -1 adjustment. As you can see, they're left blank in that upper right hand corner.
Yeah, with the ESRs are designed to be played out of, because the system understands that you might have a good day every once in a while, but when that happens, it's trying to essentially compensate for that and make sure that your handicap index is indeed at your potential, versus, you know, maybe a bit higher when this does happen. So.
Perfect. And so now you can see when you're looking at admin portal or at your own scores, you'll see this ESR spot that will show you if there was any adjustments made, what they are, and how much it was. Yeah. Yes. Alrighty. So low handicap index is going to be our next topic of conversation. And on everyone's score, in admin portal engine, everyone has a low handicap index, which is the lowest score differential that was achieved in the last year. So I believe this is a running 365-day thing, so that when you get back to, like, so this one was achieved on 11/7/2024. So he's going to hold that low handicap index until we get back. Is that right? Back to the 11/7?
Yep,
Or sorry,
unless I have a lower handicap.
Right.
So it'll stay that way unless I go lower.
Right. So, but if you happen to have a higher handicap index before that low hits, then you kind of run into some issues of the soft cap and a hard cap, but we'll get into that in a minute. So there is no limit on the amount by which a player's handicap index can decrease. But like I said, there are two trigger points that will limit extreme upward movement of a handicap index. So this is that soft cap and the hard cap. A soft cap and a hard cap will be implemented to limit the extreme upward movement of a player's handicap index within a 12-month period. So the soft cap is just there to suppress the upward movement by 50% after a 3-stroke increase. And that's the big thing there, 3-stroke increase over the low handicap index has been reached. So in our previous example, he had a 5.0 low handicap. Once he hits a 7 handicap index, that puts him in a soft cap. And then the hard cap will restrict upward movement to 5 strokes over the low handicap index. So once he hits a 10 handicap index, he will be restricted and there will be no more movement within the handicap indexes. So a soft cap and hard cap procedures only start to take effect when that movement is detected. So a player has a low handicap of a 10. His current 8/20 score averages is a 15.2. So going over this soft cap, step 1 will subtract the low handicap index from the current 8/20 average. So 15.2 minus a 10 gets us a 5.2. Step 2 is to determine how much greater than 3.0 the result is. So with that, 5.2 minus 3.0 is a 2.2. Which from there, you subtract 50% of the resulting value from 8/20 average. So the current average is that 15.2 minus the 50% of a 2.2, which puts you at a 1.1, thus being the handicap index is a 14.1.
Yep, so instead of that, the total potential 15.2, the golfer's handicap index would be soft capped at that 14.1. So just a little bit of a haircut, not too much, but still able to move up.
And so with this, you can see here, if any of your players ever come to you saying, why is my handicap index highlighted red? Why is there a little red information button next to my handicap index? That means that they're either soft capped or hard capped. So for this player, or going into a hard cap, no, soft cap. So now going into a hard cap. So if a player has a low handicap index of 10 and current of his 8 of 20 averages is a 17.4, you're going to do the same thing here, subtract the low from the current 8 of 20 average, which is at 17.4 minus 10, which is a 7.4, determine how much greater than 3.0 the result is, which will give us a 4.4 for that result. And then from there, you will subtract 50% of the resulting value. So 50% of that 4.4 is a 2.2, which overall gives us a 15.2. So instead of that 17.4, he's down to a 15.2, but he can't go higher than a 15.2 because that's more than 5 strokes. So that will actually put us at a 15.0 solid because that's 5 above the low handicap of a 10. And so then you'll see that here with the hard cap again, red numbers, red information mark. You can see there it's 5 strokes over the low handicap index of a 12.1 at a 17.1.
Correct. And so how would we get rid of this essentially? So the only thing that you can do is go to the committee and have them do an assessment on your handicap. Because usually when a hard cap is hit, it's because of injury and or they haven't played in a couple of years, and they just need the committee to take a look at their handicap. So the only way that they can not have the hard cap or the soft cap in place is to adjust this low handicap index, which the committee of your club can do, but they do need a reason to do so. Okay, nice job, Maddie. Thank you there. So for those of you who are going to be joining us for the committee session, I would recommend taking a look at the WHS committee guide. Yes, it does say 2025, but the committee guide was actually released late last year, but you can find it on our website. If you go to the membership tab, the WHS area here, and if you go all the way over, nice big red arrow shows you that the WHS Handicap Committee Guide and what year that is. And it is clickable in PDF form, and you can save it on your desktop if you want to peruse it, perhaps before you go to bed, because it'll make you nice and sleepy. Okay? All right. And if you want more information, please visit our website here, coloradogolf.org/World Handicap System, for everything and anything that we have regarding any of the new changes that happened last year and 9-hole changes, things like that, the new rules of handicapping. If you want to attend an additional seminar, this is where you would go to sign up. So please visit that for more information. And finally, today's session is now over. We're coming to a close, but we do have 2 more. We have the committee best practices here on Tuesday, March 25th, and then Tuesday, April 1st. Nope, this is not an April Fool's joke. We will be going through pretty much the same exact thing today as we will then. So if you've gone through this presentation, there's no need to go through this unless you want a little bit of extra torture. The material will be the same, but the jokes will be different. So that's the only difference between the 2. Although this one, you'll see some repeat material, but you'll also see some in-depth how to do things on the admin portal, and how to do a couple reviews and things like that. So looking forward to that one. But with that information, does anybody have any questions on anything we covered today? I'll go ahead and stop my share. Again, like I said, it was a lot of information there, but we did cover a lot. And it's, for those of you who are curious as to how the handicap index works and what we can do with it, we kind of went through some of the high level items today. So any questions, concerns? Okay. Well, with that too, let me go ahead and I will.
Well,